The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there! This is your moderator, Lori Dearman, and you're in the right place for How Fat is Your Goose? High-impact lead nurturing tactics to get more golden eggs from your prospect database. Featuring author and expert B2B marketer Ruth P. Stevens and lead generation experts Mike Agron and Tom Judge. Today's webinar is the second of a thought leadership series hosted by WebAttract, your end-to-end solution provider for webinar demand creation, and their partner, Direct Marketing Partners, a leader in blending the human touch to help clients connect with their target audience for maximizing their lead generation goals. And we're very excited that we have a diverse audience to participate in today's discussion, where our goal is to have you leave with ideas and actionable strategies to bring your prospect database to its full potential. Now, today's panel features Ruth P. Stevens, president of the New York-based consulting firm eMarketing Strategies, which specializes in customer acquisition and retention. Ruth teaches marketing at Columbia Business School and is the author of 2 business books, Maximizing Lead Generation, The Complete Guide for B2B Marketers, and Trade Show and Event Marketing. Hi, Ruth, and welcome to the webinar today.
Thanks, Lori. Very glad to be here.
And folks in the audience will also be giving you some info later on how you can get a free download of Chapter 1 of Ruth's book. Also joining our lead generation experts, Tom Judge, Vice President Strategy and Business Development of one of our sponsors, Direct Marketing Partners, as well as Mike Agron, Executive Webinar Producer with our other sponsor, WebAttract. Now, Tom has over 15 years of experience in best practice lead nurturing and was honored as one of the 50 most influential sales lead management professionals by the Sales Lead Management Association. Tom, so wonderful to have you here. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Lori. Glad to be here.
All right, Tom. And Mike, co-founder of WebAttract and as the executive webinar producer, has produced and moderated demand generation webinars for numerous global leaders such as IBM, Microsoft, UL, as well as many emerging B2B brands. Mike, welcome. Great to have you.
Thanks, Lori. Delighted to be part of the panel.
All right. And Mike's going to be back with us in the second half of the webinar, so he's going to sit tight. And why don't we go ahead and kick it off today with a poll for our audience so we can find out where you are with lead nurturing. So folks, coming up on your screen is the first of our polls. We'd like to know, how well are you cultivating the golden eggs from your prospect database? And we'll ask that you go ahead and choose just one here. Are you happy and just curious on how you could improve? Sales needs more qualified leads. Perhaps you haven't started doing lead nurturing yet, or maybe you need some ideas to build the business case. So go ahead and weigh in on this, and we'll use these results to kick things off with our panel discussion. Let's go ahead and take a look. And Ruth, what do you think of these results?
Well, I'm not surprised that the bulk of the attendees state that sales needs more qualified leads. That's really the number one job of marketing in a typical B2B environment. I'm not glad, but I'm not surprised that 17% of the group hasn't started doing lead nurturing yet, because it is, frankly, it's not that it's new, but it's being newly appreciated in the world of B2B marketing. And in fact, we're going to explain on this webinar why it's so important and how to get started. So I'm excited about getting some good information out to people.
Ruth, before we jump into the business case for lead nurturing and why lead nurturing is so important, perhaps you can start us off with defining for us all, what is a lead?
Yeah, thank you, Lori. It's really important to clarify this point, because the word lead is widely used around business to business marketing, and often used, in my view, incorrectly. Some people use the term lead to mean basically a list of prospective contacts, like a mailing list or an email prospect list. And I think that's a problem, because really what a lead is, from a sales and marketing perspective, is the name, the contactable name of someone who is a prospective buyer. And we want to distinguish a sales lead on the one hand from a qualified or sales-ready lead, which is defined as someone who is qualified to the point that that prospect is worth the time of a salesperson. Because essentially what we're trying to do in lead generation is enhance sales productivity, reduce the amount of cold calling that salespeople have to do, and possibly most important, increase their likelihood of converting that lead by making sure that it's sales ready, that it's qualified, that it's met the criteria that we've established.
Well, thanks so much, Ruth, for that definition. And now, many folks have heard of a BANT sales-ready lead, but Tom, I know that you speak of a BANT plus sales-ready lead, so perhaps you could tell us a bit about that.
The first starting point, though, is what is sales ready for your particular company? And you're going to need to sit down and align and break out with your sales leadership to define your perfect prospect, if you will, or the conditions that must be met. And what we're finding is under these categories that the typical sales ready BANT plus, let's call it, has got anywhere from 10 to 12, 15 data points that must be collected in order to be really information rich enough to graduate upstream and go to the sales team. So that's one of the big things that is different than just the hand raiser of the responder. So this information, including data capture and cleansing, which could be overlays as well as information, behavioral information from the website, as well as other information that could be layered on, along with the plant information. Then once if you will, it hits the score properly, it's a natural to ask for that next step and move to a appointment or a next step or a registration or whatever that next step may be. So I want to make sure that was clear on the depth that we're talking about for sales ready leads as Ruth moves into some of these other points.
Well, thanks so much, Tom. And now, Ruth, let's drill down and identify where lead generation fits into the lead nurturing process.
Yeah, actually it's the other way around, Lori, where lead nurturing fits into the lead generation process, if you don't mind. But just building on what Tom said, he walked us through a set of steps relating to qualification. And in fact, everything that we do in lead generation is about a step-by-step process. And if you look at how these steps lay out, you can see that lead nurturing is a natural flow between lead qualification and the handoff to sales, and it's truly essential. But one of the things I like to remind us all of is that lead generation, management, tracking is a set of processes that's fairly scientific. It's less about the glamorous creativity of marketing communications, and it's really more about following the process step by step and making sure that the infrastructure and the processes are in place. So it's really more of a science than an art, is my point. And to that point, I'd like to just point out that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what lead nurturing is not, or people think that lead nurturing is just possibly sending out an email blast or random phone calls or event invitations. If we look at the next slide, we can see some of the misconceptions out there about what people think about lead nurturing sometimes. But in fact, it really needs to be specific to the particular target prospect that we're trying to nurture along to become sales ready. And it's also, as Tom pointed out, it's essential that it be not about selling. It really is more about relationship building and education and customer relationship. And thus it needs to be as relevant, timely, educational, non-salesy, welcome, and consistent as we can possibly make it. So to that end, I could transition over to the point that lead nurturing as part of this ongoing lead generation process really can be justified through simple math around how nurturing can vastly enhance the productivity of your campaign. And of course, most lead generation programs begin with an outbound campaign of some sort to generate inquiries. And say we began with 100 inquiries, like in this example, notice how few of the responses, like in this example we've said only 5%, arrive qualified. And what we need to do then is make sure that we have some kind of outbound contact to begin the qualification process. And we may, through our outbound qualification efforts, convert another, say in this example we've said, well, we could only reach 57 of the 95 remaining inquiries, but we were able to qualify 20 of them through our normal qualification process. But hey, that's still a lot of people who are not ready to see a salesperson, and this is the point where we need to introduce a step-by-step nurturing program. And it's that nurturing program, which, by the way, these are not atypical numbers at all. You might be able to qualify another 30% of those remaining prospects and add basically another 5 times the productivity to the campaign by staying in touch with these people until they're ready, until they have the budget, or until their time frame is closer, or whatever are the criteria by which the salespeople are going to be able to convert those leads. So if anybody needs to justify the investment in lead nurturing, these kinds of numbers can help. And the net of it is you can truly vastly, by as much as 5-fold, increase the productivity of your lead generation campaigns in terms of delivering the steady stream of qualified leads to sales that we've all signed up for as B2B marketers.
Well, perfect, Ruth, and I think those are some pretty compelling numbers, but really the question that I think begs to be asked is, if lead nurturing is so great, why don't more companies do it?
Yeah, one wonders. Well, there are a bunch of reasons, but the ones that really strike me is that this is not the glamour side of B2B marketing. If anything in B2B marketing is glamorous, this is really more the place where process wins, and the company with the best process is the one that's going to be the most productive. And so marketers sort of get caught up in the excitement of the initial lead generation campaign, and they just might think that the follow-up stuff is too boring or tedious to attract them. Another reason, I think, is that it really requires some extra steps and a lot of initial planning and process, and a typical lead nurturing program can last 6, 9, 12, even longer months, and that is a fairly daunting process. It requires a long-term view, and this is not where, a typical salesperson is saying, hey, I only want a lead that's going to close within 30 days. This is not that. So we occasionally get into trouble when we don't introduce step-by-step nurturing into our lead generation programs.
Okay, and Tom, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Well, yeah. As a sales lead nurturing and development service company, we initiate with a diagnostic process up front, and we see this all the time. And it's just human nature. It is hard, arduous, tedious work. It requires, you're down at the one-to-one level of communications, and it's a process, and a lot of firms don't have the time and the bandwidth. And And frankly, they underestimate many times the number of touches or the number of content or the non-salesy effort that it takes. And also we see that a lot of people don't realize that that 5x value, and we see that some of them don't realize that you can in fact nurture. They keep going back to that top of the funnel effort again.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth and Tom. And Ruth, let's start some concrete steps to help weed out the bad eggs and get started on the right track with lead nurturing.
Yes, we do want to get to those golden eggs, don't we? So what I have here is a step-by-step process, or an analysis of the steps that companies can take to put a nurturing process in place. And again, this may be boring, but it is a process, and so we're going to break it down into manageable steps. The first step being that the qualification process that we mentioned earlier. And your typical qualification process, there really are two ways to do it. One is to include the qualification questions on the initial response, whether it was a web-based reply form or a response form through the mail or whatever medium is being used. There may be qualification, there may be inquiries that did not fill out the questions fully, and there may be situations where we have handed a lead to sales and it was not really closable and it comes back to us. So there are lots of inquiries that require qualification. The typical tactics are, one, either put the qualification questions on the response form at the initial inquiry, as I mentioned, or two, conduct an outbound communication, usually by email and sometimes by phone, to do that qualification. Then step two is simply sorting the remaining non-qualified prospects, the ones that we haven't been able to qualify through that initial push, into buckets. And usually the way we do that is based on the qualification criteria. And as Tom mentioned, budget, opportunity, time frame are very frequently used as qualification criteria, but you may also be looking for particular job titles, or if you're smart, you will have asked during the qualification process whether the respondent would actually like to see a sales rep or be contacted by a sales rep. That's a winner if you get that answer. And then once the non-qualified prospects have been sorted into buckets, then what we want to do in step three is profile those responders. And the reason that we need to profile them is, of course, so that we can gain insight into their needs and the business issues that are on their minds. And the reason we need that insight is so that we can craft a nurturing process for those segments that is maximally relevant to them. Typically, we're not going to develop a unique nurturing process for every prospect. We're going to sort them into buckets and develop a certain numbers. It might be 3, it might be 5, it may be more different nurturing processes or flows, and those will be coming out of our profiling and segmentation process. We also, it's a good idea if we can prioritize those respondents, because the ones that are most likely to be converted to qualified leads should get our earliest attention, of course. And then all of that profiling and analysis needs to be housed in a database so that the actions can be taken and the communications can be scheduled. So that moves us to step 4, which is sort of the fun part in a way, and this is setting up the nurturing pathway, or the series of steps and the decision about which media, communications media, will be used for each step. And typically we want to use marketing automation to enable these communication streams. It can get really complicated really fast. So but the way most companies do this is segment by the typical B2B variables like industry, company size, and buying role. At which point we come to step 5, which is if a miracle happens and we've done our jobs right, then we can hand that qualified prospect off to sales and then stay in touch with salespeople over time to track how well they're doing on the conversion process, the sales process. And if they're having trouble with the lead, then we may want to take it back and nurture it further.
All right. Well, Ruth, thanks so much for sharing the 5 steps of the lead nurturing process. And now, Tom, conventional wisdom says that it takes 12 touches to deliver a sales-ready lead. Can you expand on why this is the case?
Why, sir? Well, first of all, since we're raising the bar on the lead quality with the concept of the BAM Plus sales-ready lead, that's leading to harder qualification cycles. However, it's also leading to faster and easier close cycles. So that's a good. However, remember, you've got a number of data points, and earlier in our examples we were talking about 10, 12, 15. I've heard of more, but I don't want to scare anybody of what the sales force requires now. Now, the reality is that these prospects, they call the shots. Okay, now you're down to the one-to-one level. You have to play the game by their demeanor, okay? So, and they're just not going to give up those data points unless you've, in some way, shape, or form, earned the right to ask that question. It's that simple. Just by sending them a white paper, they're not going to say, wow, where you've been all my life. These people process things. They do it in their time, so there's a lot of tedious follow-up, and it's got to be based now on the individual discussion and follow-up cycle, whether it be a call or an email or a webinar and things like that. So this is the new reality, is that there are follow-up information gathering, information sharing cycles that are part of lead nurturing that are extremely tricky to do. The other thing that takes time is that they've got limited bandwidth, these people. So you've got to follow in their availability and strike when the iron's hot. And you've got to try and pull out of them the triggers and the timing. And if y'all have read the book about shift selling, it talks a great deal about when certain triggers go off along with the other atmospheric problems, boom, it's the time to move the lead into the sales force. So in summary, all of these dynamics for the are progressing profiling, and it takes multiple touches in order to yield that 5x more sale-ready leads.
Okay, and Tom, William in our audience has a question, and he'd like to know, how do you manage the nurturing process when you don't have the staff to manage it correctly?
Well,
what a setup.
That's the birth of our outsource industry. We are Mark Partners is a lead development firm. You can outsource it, or you can draw up some specifications and attempt to insource it. Those seem to be the two most popular. Of course, the least popular, but it happens all the time, is the people who do nothing. But I don't recommend that route.
And another possibility, Tom, is that the sales force may be assigned that function, and I think both you and I would argue that that's not good use of the sales force's time.
Well, we're right back to that. We're right back to our original research that CSO had, that Sales and Marketing Management published this same month, Ruth, that they've only got 30, they've been challenged with so many non-selling tasks, they're down to only 30% of their time to selling. So that's kind of perpetuating the problem to do that. So I concur with your point.
All right. Well, thanks so much for the questions. Keep them coming in, and again, we will get to those. I see a few more coming as we get to the Q&A session at the end. But for now, why don't we move into tips on the kinds of communication vehicles that work best in nurturing. But to do that, why don't we launch our second poll, and we'll have the audience weigh in on what content they use most for nurturing communications.
Can't wait to hear.
Yes, so let's take a look at that. Folks, coming up on your screen is that poll. What content do you use most for nurturing communications? Is it email, telenurturing, direct mail, webinars, or something else? Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. Looks like, wow, 76% with email, and then followed by telenurturing, webinars, direct mail, and other. And Ruth, any thoughts there?
Very interesting. I'm actually glad to see that webinars is getting as much attention as it is, because webinars are actually really, really effective as part of the nurturing process. And email is the number one, I think, in the world for as a communications medium. Aberdeen actually did a study about a year and a half ago that revealed that email is, in fact, the top nurturing media channel, with 65% of respondents using it. But interestingly, direct mail is the second top, according to Aberdeen, with 44% users, and telephone was came in at 26%. So it sounds like the group that we have on the call today is a little bit more heavily using the phone, which I heartily endorse. I think the phone is just incredibly powerful. But if we can just transition to the next slide, I'd like to share with you the point that there are, in fact, scads of nurturing tactics that work in B2B marketing. They can be all over the place, and using more versus less, I think, can add some excitement and variety to your nurturing program. And I urge you to try some of these, and in fact set your own mind to coming up with meaningful ways to deliver valuable information as sort of an excuse to stay in touch with prospects until they're ready to see a salesperson. And so to that point, I'd like to share with you an example of, and by the way, if you're writing too fast, we will be sharing these slides with the attendees, so you can stop writing right now. But I wanted to share just a hypothetical example of a typical nurturing flow that includes not only the time frame in terms of how many days out from the initial inquiry, but also the nature of the message and the communication medium that you might use to deliver the invitation or the content. And what I'm proposing and urging everyone on the call is, based on segments, you might have a handful of segments. It's essential to set up in advance a nurturing flow like this, so that you know exactly how you're going to stay in touch with people, because this is more like relationship marketing and less like email blasts and outbound campaigns. This is really relationship management, and needs to be not only consistent and highly valuable, non-salesy, but it also needs to be planned in advance so that it can be executed flawlessly. So this may sound a little daunting, but I think Tom has a good idea for us about how to get your arms around this so that it's less complicated. So, Tom, how about sharing that bundling idea?
Yeah, well, here's just a real quick example. It doesn't have to be. It is a process, and it can be tedious, but let's face it, it's got to be done, and it can be done in a fashion in smaller nurture bundles, okay? Now, there could be a multitude of touch points in here, but here's just an example of one. Remember, feeding off of what Ruth said, in a non-salesy way, we want to help the sale process along, but we have to earn those rights to ask those questions. So we're going to have to come to them with a multitude of different options. For example, we may, in that initial screening qualification, we may create a pathway for a particular product nurture track or a solution set, and it may involve, news events, feeding them from various media or email streams, product information in a timely fashion, or white papers, and testing these bundles is extremely critical. And one thing that we can say as a service provider is one of the big tipping points that we see in gathering sales-ready BANT information is before, during, and after webinars, believe it or not. Interesting.
Well, thanks so much. And, now I'd like to hear a bit from Mike. I know, Mike, you've done a webinar or two in your time, and perhaps you can expand on the power of how webinars are an effective communication tool and also how they can help leverage the nurturing process.
Sure, thanks, Laura. Yes, we've done a couple. And, just to preface this whole discussion on the importance of lead nurturing and being able to have qualified leads, I can remember before the virtual world that we live in that you wanted to sit down and break bread as early and often with the prospect to create that relationship. Today, because of travel and a lot of other reasons, we can't do that. And webinars have proven to be an extremely effective tactic in being able to create those opportunities. And what you see up here is a recent study by the Content Marketing Institute. And they were asking marketeers, what are some of the most effective tactics that you use? And interestingly, 70% rated webinars and webcasts as effective or very effective in being able to reach out and create new relationships. So if we take a look at that and we go to the next topic about webinars, let me just talk for a second on the value proposition. I think there's some obvious benefits from demand generation using webinars. Obviously, it's a great way to get fresh new sales leads. It's another way to raise your brand awareness and to also promote your thought leadership. But let's talk about some of the not so obvious benefits. And Tom touched upon some of them, as did Ruth. What's not so obvious is that they're really a magnet for attracting people who are interested in either learning something that they don't know because their current needs aren't being met, they're dissatisfied with their current state, or they're actively looking for a solution. And if you're able to target a demographic that's matched your value proposition, people will self-select and opt in, which says, I'm interested, I'll listen to what you have to say. Those are some of the most not so obvious benefits that we see going on today. And then if you take that a step further, Tom mentioned this, the beauty is you're able to gather and leverage what we call registering intelligence across the entire webinar lifecycle. You can do that before, during, and after the webinar. For example, before the webinar, those of you that signed up for today's webinar know that we asked a couple non-invasive questions to understand your industry, but we also asked you, what would you like to learn? That was extremely helpful to let us know if we're connecting with the message and also what we should be talking about. During the webinar, it's a great way to engage using online polls and surveys. We can in real time measure your interest and opinions. Some of the questions that have come in today are terrific. They help us guide what we're doing. After, we're able to use such content as on-demand recordings, and we could use that to keep the company top of mind with meaningful content. We can take today's webinar and take sound bites out of it that we feel are relevant, share them with prospects, put them on our website. But the most important thing here is that going across the life cycle, we're able to have a warm conversation if you want to talk to one of us after the webinar, because we understand more about, what your interests are, than just calling you cold. So if I were to summarize everything about using webinars as a tactic in demand generation, the key is this. If you educate and deliver something that's not a sales pitch, you will have people who want to learn and want to have a one-on-one conversation with you after the webinar. That's probably the most important thing to learn, and this is really what's important. Webinars are about educating and informing, not about selling. But the most important thing you can get out of it is someone who wants to extend a dialogue and discuss with you how you can create a mutually beneficial business relationship. And again, it's a terrific way to help support your nurturing campaign. So Lori, thanks for the time. I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well, thanks so much, Mike, for the insights. And folks, we are just about ready to close off. And William, Jason, Chris, Steve, several others, I see your questions coming in the queue, and please stick around. We'll be getting to them. But first, I would like to have Ruth cover off and Tom cover off on some insights as well as some key takeaways for today.
Yeah, I'll jump in on the key takeaways, and this is just real quick because a lot of the folks in their sign-up sheet asked, what are some of the big ideas. So leads developed through a nurturing process have a higher sales conversion rate than those from one-touch lead generation effort. Sure, you didn't hear that here first, but we're here to document it as Ruth states in her book. The DMA reports that telephone qualification rates are the highest of the direct marketing vehicles. And what we mean there is that graduation point from information gathering with the suspects into a sales-ready, robust lead. That happens quite a bit with the telephone. That's what the DMA had measured there. Because I know earlier we stated the thing about the use of email, but as far as graduating and producing sales ready, the telephone is number one. And then finally, Aberdeen, they're always out there studying, and they study the companies where they demonstrably, I like that word, increased sales, use proven lead nurturing techniques. And then I read that report, and overwhelmingly, the companies that are doing it have better sales.
All right, and thanks so much. And perhaps now we can just go through some ideas on how folks can get started with lead nurturing.
Sure. And for those of you that are just putting your toe in the water, or those of you that are somewhat advanced, I hope these half a dozen help. I took these out of my workshop and just tried to synthesize them down. But essentially, start with the end in mind. Determine sales quotas and goals, and then you know your number. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that. And then formalize that sales-ready lead criteria with the sales team. You've got to do it, but it's worth it. And remember, that's the one where we found the average is 10, 15 data points deep. Easy. Quantify the number of sales-ready leads that you need to produce. Okay, let's get those reverse sales funnels out, and then look at marketing and how many of these sales-ready with the close rates, with the enhanced close rates, and our quotas in hand, how many we have to produce. Once you look at those numbers, they'll either be scary or maybe not so bad. Identify the nurture touch sequences and vehicles to engage the prospects. Ruth covered this quite a bit, and I tried to add a little bit of flair to it, but test those and all the nurturing tracks that you do. Track them, benchmark them, look at your metrics. Metrics are key here, and then compare those back up to number 3 when you've quantified what your numbers have to be. And then finally, with these fundamentals in hand, you're a good candidate, if you haven't done so already, you're a good candidate to move to automating the model, either yourself with tools or with the service agency.
Yeah, and could I just add, Tom, that back to the point about sitting down with your sales team to establish the qualification criteria, I would urge our audience to keep in mind that just because the salesperson says what they want in a qualified lead, that we should use a bit of a grain of salt in assessing their requirements, because they can get a little bit unrealistic, like saying, hey, I only want to talk to people who have a guaranteed budget and are ready to buy tomorrow. So,
and a purchase order in hand.
Right. But to your point about testing, I would reinforce that it's essential to test the sequence, although it's not easy to set up such multivariate tests. But continuous improvement is really where we're trying to go with these programs, so that we can get better and better at the process.
Well, Ruth, Tom, Mike, great content, great ideas on how folks can get started. I wanted to just put up a slide here on how everyone can continue the conversation with the folks at Direct Marketing Partners. You've got the contact information on the screen. Again, as promised, to download a Chapter 1, free Chapter 1 of Ruth's book, you can go out to www.maximizingleadgeneration.com. Also, you've got Ruth's contact information there for you. And also, if you'd like to continue the conversation with the folks at WebAttract and Mike, you've got contact information there as well. don't worry about scribbling this all down. This has been recorded. You'll be receiving a link to it early next week. Also, the information will be included in a follow-up email, and it's come over to you via chat. If you want to just copy and paste it locally right now, you can certainly do that. So we do invite you to continue the conversation, and at this point, I would like to ask all of our speakers to step back to the virtual podium so we can get to these great questions that are queuing up. First one I have here, over to you, Ruth, and this is from Steve. How do you set up tests of optimal nurturing communication streams?
Great. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, setting up tests is actually pretty complicated because if you have, say, 18 touches or 12 touches in mind, each one of them or each different stream will have to be tested as a whole. But the first step in thinking about testing is to make sure that you have some kind of response vehicle or response mechanism included in your nurturing stream using, frankly, direct response communications techniques so that you can assess the productivity of each touch. And once that information is available to you, then you can set up test panels within those segments, and maybe as simple as an A-B split, that one group of prospects in a segment is getting one stream and the other is getting a different stream, and after 6 months or 9 months assess the productivity from those two different groups. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Ruth. And this one, Mike, from Terry. And he'd like to know, from a lead generation standpoint, how do you prioritize following up with folks who register versus those that attend?
It's a great question. Given what I was describing as why people will opt in, the real value of people registering for a webinar is that they are interested. The fact that they couldn't attend on the day of the webinar is just because life got in the way. So we prioritize just about equal value, registrants or attendees or no-shows. They're all equal. They all indicated an interest in wanting to learn more. So that's how we do that. And I think I saw a question come across, Lori. I don't know if you got it. I just want to answer it so it doesn't go undescribed or qualified. When we talk about effectiveness, the Content Marketing Institute found that of the 5 top approaches or tactics that were effective, in-person events such as trade shows were rated as number 1 at 78%. Webinars and webcasts were rated effective to very effective, 70%, followed by using case studies at 70% or 68% rated research reports. So these are all, as Ruth said, just different tactics to helping your nurturing, and this is at the top of the list. So hopefully that answered the question that we had before.
Okay, thanks so much, Mike. And this one for you, Tom, coming from Jason. Is 12 touches per lead an average of touches for only qualified leads, or average of touches per qualified lead plus people who fall out?
Good question. So people can, first of all, Jason, thanks. People can qualify at their own individual run rates, and let's face it, people can fall out of the cycle and disqualify at their own run rate as well. So I would say people tend to disqualify quicker, and that's our goal, is to vet through them, because there are a lot of people who, let's face it, are false positive. They raise their hands, they're the student, or they're the people that aren't really in your perfect prospect profile that you want to develop. So they'll fall out very quickly. So rarely do you get up to 10, 12 touches invested and they fall out, but it can happen. But the 10, 12, 14 type of touch sequence, when I look back at our studies on robust sales pipelines that are reported by our client base, the nurturing numbers are clear. It's anywhere from 10 to 12, 14, and then they start to pop.
All right. Thanks so much, Tom. This one for you, Ruth. William would like to know, is there a process or guidelines that define what content you should use through the sales cycle?
Yes, there is, and it's on the continuum of level of engagement. And it might have been a good idea for me to add some kind of level of engagement factor to that checklist that we showed earlier. But we all know that webinars, for example, are most productive in providing rich product information or other business solutions, because we have, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 45 minutes of time to share a lot of rich information. So they tend to be most effective later in the nurturing process, when someone has is still in the mix and still interested in learning more and communicating and staying in touch with us, and hasn't been vetted out like Tom mentioned. Earlier in the process, simpler tactics might be more effective, like a simple email that it might provide some another link to a piece of content, perhaps, or a letter possibly from a sales executive that asks them if they want more information, or actually it wouldn't be a real salesperson, but it would be over the name of a salesperson, for example. So I would sort of rank the tactics by engagement level or likelihood that they are reflective of how engaged the prospect is with us and our solution, and schedule them according to that ranking.
Okay, thanks so much, Ruth. And this one for you, Mike. Can you give us a webinar nurturing example?
Well, sure. There's lots of them. I think if I go back to when I was talking about carrying a bag and being in the field with selling, each time I could meet with a prospect was a touch. But what we found is, from our own experience and from our clients' experience, is that there have been situations where somebody was pushed off the fence, who was not sure of which direction they were going to go to actually make a purchase after they heard a webinar, because the content was very, very specific to how a business problem was solved and they could relate to it. That enhanced the process. I've had situations where a major big box retailer was dissatisfied with how their retail sales floor was working, and one of the clients that we did a webinar for was talking about how to provide a very, very innovative way to train and manage salespeople, and that literally resulted in them getting into not only a lead they never had, but getting into a conversation that resulted in $1 million sale. So there's lots of ways that this happens, but primarily what Ruth has been talking about and what Tom has been talking about, it's another touch. It's another opportunity to get people into a conversation and build upon a relationship.
Okay, thanks so much. And over to you, Tom, and this is from Chris. Nurturing in the parental sense involves lots of listening. What is the business version of listening to prospects, and how can it be executed most effectively?
Oh, okay, Chris, thanks for asking that. You must have heard some of my comments earlier about one of the most effective things about nurturing prospects is the fact that you're on a one-to-one basis, and the number one thing you want to do is listen. And listen attentively. So you've got to set up a process and a system, if you will, to not only train your staff to listen to key pain points and to be able to have non-salesy conversations to help people in their job, but then to collect that information. Also, on your other streams, on your landing page and on your emails, you must have it set up to collect that necessary profile information. And then commingle that all together in your lead nurturing system and draw from it the metrics. So there's your business listening. And then from there, finally, use that information from the listening to make adaptations in your nurturing messaging and sequence to, of course, accomplish your business objectives.
Okay, thanks so much, Tom. This one for you, Ruth, and coming from Steve. Is press release on the list as a way to actually reach media or for the backlink benefits?
Yeah, I'm glad Steve raised that question because I did have a press release on the checklist of how you can mix up communications, media, and content to keep it fresh and interesting. And what I meant in this case is using a press release as a reason to deliver new, fresh information to the prospect and not to the media. Now, our corporate communications or PR departments are usually generating press releases all the time, and they're using them for media relations or for pitching stories or whatever. And the idea here is that we in marketing communications can also pick those up and repurpose them as a tool for staying in touch with prospects during the nurturing stream. So thanks, Steve, for that question.
All right, and this one for you, Tom, coming from Todd. What are some of the common failure points we should watch for?
Oh, imagine that. People experiencing challenges. Well, since you ask, I would say some of the common failure points are, it kind of harkens back to Ruth's list earlier in the event, in that there are certain things we tend to do to kind of approach it with a Band-Aid. But before actually doing those tactics, I think the biggest failure point I see is the failure to plan and connect with the sales process. Because other than that, people aren't quite sure what they're doing, so they start doing tactics. And then Ruth's list of 5 faux pas pop in, sending, emails out just kind of disjointedly. Those are good efforts, but they need to be incorporated into the plan. And I think that's the biggest one. And I think another one of the issues I see is people get started and they jump in with marketing automation tools too soon. They haven't done the end-to-end sequence of what they need to do, and then the automation tools just don't have a guidepost. Automation doesn't guide you. Rather, you have to have your process in place. And Ruth opened the whole conversation around, marketing, lead generation to sales is a process. Know that process, then you can automate it. And I think, go ahead, jump in.
Can I just add one? I often see the failure to budget for nurturing, and often we create a lead generation budget, but we don't consider what it's going to cost to stay in touch with a prospect, not only for nurturing, but also even for outbound qualification communication. So I advise people to assess the expense that is incurred on the back end as a whole and divide that by the number of unqualified leads that need to be managed to come up with a back-end cost of communication, and to put that number into the initial marketing budget, because it really, even though it's a fixed cost in one viewpoint, it also has variable components. So it's a really good idea to get that funded up front with the initial campaign, so that there's no excuse when the inquiry comes in not to have the tools and the processes in place to stay in touch with the prospect.
Yes, and moreover, to your point, I see once people wake up to this, and again, remember that 5-fold factor, you guys. Once people wake up to this, the budgeting there, as Ruth calls out, it becomes kind of second nature. Sure, you're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. Chances are, like we established earlier, your budgets are flat. We realize that. You're just moving the buckets around more, and nurturing is a really good way to get more bang for the buck. So you may lose some of the front-end programs, okay, but you're picking up by optimizing more from the initial campaigns you do run.
Well, gosh, thanks so much, Ruth and Tom and Mike. I know we're having a fabulous conversation, and I encourage everyone to continue this conversation post-webinar. We are rubbing up against the top of the hour, so Before we sign off, I would like to thank each of you all for joining us and trust that you found today to be of value. And of course, special thanks to our panelists, Ruth P. Stevens, Mike Agron of WebAttract, Tom Judge of DMP. Also would like a special thanks to our logistics producer, Patty Van Hooser of WebAttract, Nisa Hayden of DMP for their behind-the-scenes collaboration and support. And most importantly, thanks for joining us. And as your moderator, this is Lori Dearman saying have a great rest of the week. Bye for now.